All right, welcome to today's ambient work group meeting. We have a packed agenda, so let's jump to the first agenda. John, you had a FYI. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I think that's old, and I've said it in the past meetings, but I forget if that's true. So if not, Hyper released their actual 1.0. We've been on the 1.0 release candidate for like over a year. So I have a work in progress to update to that, which is easy. The problem is that we need the rest of the ecosystem to update more or less. So trying to figure that out. That'll be good to actually depend on stable dependencies. That's all.
Okay, so is there any action you want anybody else to do?
No, unless someone wants to go contribute to a bunch of dependencies to make them speed up adoption. But I think there's actually probably just one that we need that I've already done is waiting on review. It's like two options we can take basically. So it's either a short-term bridge option or make Tonic, which is the gRPC library update, which is probably a giant effort. That's probably not something that we can really help with. So.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for the update. Yuval, I guess you are up next.
Yeah, so this is actually something we have been testing internally at Solo, and we're talking about changing the way traffic redirection works today in zTunnel. Let's work with me and Ben Leggett. I believe Ben, you're also here, right? Today, the way redirection in zTunnel works is that it's done in the host network namespace. And the issues with that CNIs also work in the host network namespace. So now we have issues. Basically, we need to make sure our redirections happens before the CNI. And each CNI implements its logic differently, which means that we'll need to have different logic for different CNIs. As an alternative, we propose a method that instead of doing redirections from within from the host namespace, we'll do it instead from within the pod network namespace. So essentially, we'll open up. It's going to be network-wise very similar to how a sidecar works, but it'll still be one zTunnel pod. So it's kind of approach that to the CNI, to the network, it looks like a sidecar, but it's still not a sidecar. Pods don't need to be touched. It works very similar to ambient working today. That's kind of the background. I'm trying to think what makes sense. We kind of outlined the design here. We also have it working internally. We can go over, what to do here. What would be most helpful? What do you think, Lynn?
So I assume I've already pinned a bunch of folks to review the proposal. I would assume maybe people, maybe we can go over the diagram quickly and open up for questions.
Yeah, definitely. So the way this works at the high level is that we have two new components. Well, one new component, the CNI agent, and some rework of how the zTunnel works. And the way it works is that whenever a new pod is created, the tunnel gets the pod's network namespace file descriptor from the CNI agent. And it uses the network namespace file descriptor to start its set of listening sockets in that pod network namespace. Kind of like how this diagram is illustrated. And the CNI agent will set up redirection rules. So again, the pod doesn't need to be touched. You have the, long straws. You have the CNI, the zTunnel running in one pod and its own network namespace. But each individual socket can have a different network namespace, right? So that's the long straw here, right? You have a socket that is operated inside the zTunnel process, but the socket itself appears in the network namespace of the pod. Right? So with combination with some redirection rules and IP table redirection rules, we get a configuration that network-wise looks like a sidecar. And that kind of guarantees us that ambient will work in any CNI that sidecar works.
Right, because we don't have any this allows us to not have any redirection rules in the host namespace at all. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
how do you get the engagement packet from ztunnel to the workload? Yeah, we just send it. You care to elaborate, John?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, that answers my question. I guess, do you have issues that the CNI is interacting then with the packets from ztunnel to the workload? Like, do you need to have a network policy allowing all traffic from ztunnel?
No, because ztunnel, the outbound socket, it also opens them in the pod network namespace.
No, I'm talking about decapping once it decaps the H-bone, now the packet needs to go from ztunnel to the workload. How does the packet get there?
ztunnel opens the outbound socket in the pod network namespace and sends it as usual. So the CNI is not aware of it.
But that's not the outbound socket's the 15,001 listener.
So those are not the outbound listener. I mean, like the socket that you use to.
Okay, that one as well is also doing the. Okay, that's okay. Yeah.
Austin, I think you're up next.
Yeah, I've used this technique before and it works pretty well. So I'm not concerned about it working. I just have a question. Would it work also to inject UDS sockets and other things? That's for a slightly different subject, but I want to. It's kind of the same mechanism. So
will it work for UDS sockets? What do you mean?
Yes. So you're injecting a socket into the pod namespace. So for example, if we wanted to move this to agent for sidecars, or if we wanted to do some, other fancy stuff, would we be able to use the same mechanism? Or did you think about it or consider, for example, for exposing the metadata server or providing some other services to pods?
So if you're doing anonymous UDS sockets, that might work. But because the ztunnel doesn't have access to the mount namespace,
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and second question is, what is the reason we need this extra complexity? I mean, can we just use the current mechanism and redirect to ztunnel IP address, or is the problem that we cannot extract original destination, or what is requiring us to do this extra?
To do the extra what? Sorry.
Extra work to inject a socket instead of plain inject some stuff into the pod namespace that is redirecting everything to the address of the or routing. Sorry, that is routing everything to the ztunnel pod. Because in the past we also explored or discussed using routing instead of redirection, which is something that has been used for other, middle proxy egress interception and so forth, where we just insert a routing rule and because it becomes a router. I mean, assuming we can have, but forwarding is enabled anyway in the node. So then we don't have to do all this dance.
So you're saying set up routing, like the ztunnel will be the gateway?
Yes, set up change the default route in the pod from whatever it is now to the ztunnel address, and then all packets will naturally go there. And then in ztunnel you can do whatever you want. You can have normal IP table interception or T-proxy or whatever you want, and we are done because we avoid most of the complexity.
That's possible. I think that should have more edge cases than this approach. So, for example, if the ztunnel restarts and gets a different IP, we need to update that. Or if there's CNI rules that mess with the routing, we need to account for that. This gives you a stronger guarantee, I think. Costin, do you want to unmute yourself?
So, so Constant, does that help?
Yeah, no. I understand. It's just so we should explore it, but probably we should look at routes, because I know that has been used for quite a while to inject egress proxies into for parental control and a lot of other use cases where there are different devices, different computers, and by manipulating the routes you can intercept the outbound traffic.
Yeah, what do you see is the advantage of that approach?
Oh, simpler. It's just a route. But anyway, whatever works, it works. I mean, I know this it is going to work. I've seen it working before. We should keep the options, so to explore if there are other ways. But anyway, just comments.
Okay, thank you, Austin. Sanjeev, I think you're up next.
Yeah. So really interesting and good proposal. In fact, we had some similar ideas, so we should collaborate. And in fact, if we get time, we can briefly go over that in this call as the next item. But one quick question I had before that was, it's still not obvious to me that the network policies are not getting bypassed. And I'll just add the second question as well, and you can answer both. Have you tested this with OVS-based CNIs?
Lindy, know what we tested? I think we tested with OpenShift.
Yeah, so we did test it with OpenShift. Is that, I assume that's the OVS-based CNI you are referring to, Sanjeev? So we tested on EKS. We tested on, well, we didn't test on GKE because the DPV2, so we have trouble testing on DPV2, but we tested on EKS and Azure, I believe.
Yeah, I think it probably
and
GKE
also
was dual
OpenShift.
stack. We had some issues with that.
Oh, right,
But
yes.
unrelated to the mechanism, just general Z-tunnel and dual stack.
Sorry, bottom line is that you have tested with OVS CNIs like OpenShift. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, we have tested on OpenShift. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to dig into more into that, so we can do that separately. But coming back to the network policies, I mean, let's just follow a simple pod-to-pod within the same node case, right? And let's say there was a network policy blocking pod A from talking to pod B, but we are remapping the source pod's socket to the Z-tunnel's socket here. And let's say that the actual switching path is not through the host net, not through IP tables, but through something like OVS, right? So the OVS would perform network policies inside the OVS layer using IPs using the original pod IPs. But here you are sending into the Z tunnel. I guess for these two hops, the source pod to the Z tunnel, and then the second hop from the Z tunnel to the destination pod.
So the second hop is from the Z tunnel, but it's from the pod's network namespace. So it looks like it's coming out of the pod.
With the source IP of the pod, source pod?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Just the port changes to the H1 port.
Okay, interesting. We'll need to think it through.
Is it merge or is a PR open that people can try?
There can be. We wanted to bring it up here first, but we can open a PR against Z-tunnel and Istio.
A PR branch. I mean, it sounds something that people can try in different scenarios, and it's easier to answer the questions by trying it.
So it sounds like there's a general approval for us to go ahead and open a PR or branch for people to try. I saw Andre also wants to try it in the environment. Is there any big objection for doing that as a next step? I'm not hearing any at the moment. It sounds like everybody is excited.
PR. You can open a PR that says Istio sucks if you want.
No, no, no. But we don't want to do, wasted work if there's a strong pushback at this moment, right? But which I'm not hearing any.
So Lynn, quite the opposite. Anything we do in pod namespace, it's definitely better than messing with. It's safer. We have been doing it for quite a while, so I don't think anyone would object to doing stuff in pod namespace.
Okay, cool. I guess I want to give a shout out to Yuval and Ben. This is really, they have done a lot of work internally. It's like 6 months of their work. So we're excited to, socialize and upstream this to the community. I believe it's going to solve one of the biggest hurdle in the Istio community for Ambient, right? To be able to support any of the CNI out there. And to your point, costing is actually more secure in the pod network, which is good too.
Yuval, do you want to talk about the cap requirements on zTunnel in terms of permissioning?
Yes. So to create sockets in different network namespace, we need to use the syscall setns. I think it requires netadmin, or sorry, sysmin. Let's see. I don't have it in the top of my head, but yeah, we do need extra capability to use setns. The cap sysadmin.
A little bit more than catnet admin to do this.
In fact, let me add it to the doc.
You all, one more quick thing. I mean, obviously, I'll need to think through this offline, but are both these hops going through the CNI switching layer, the source to the zTunnel and the zTunnel to the destination?
All the traffic comes into and out from the pod's network namespace. It kind of looks like to the network as if there's a sidecar that's talking to each one.
Fine, but I guess, are there two hops in the CNI switching layer or one hop in the CNI switching layer?
So the between the pod to the zTunnel, it's not through the CNI. It's a socket, so it's doesn't make it outside the pod network namespace.
Okay, so there's one CNI switching hop. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I saw a hand. John, did you have a hand? I think it's you in the room.
Yes, that is me. One thing I do want to talk about is some of the different behaviors of Git, and one I brought up in the doc is the
trade-off section,
right?
Yeah.
So now we are putting the routing rule, like we can't have egress policies basically. Like the pod is now in control of whether its traffic goes to zTunnel or not. And so we don't have egress policies today. So it's not a blocker in that sense, but it was something that that the old architecture allowed to add in the future. So I just want to make sure at least everyone's aware of this, that it is, as far as I can tell, a hard blocker to adding egress policies in Istio.
John, you're saying this because it's the pod's network namespace that is the trust boundary for the egress policy, right?
Yeah.
Where in reality, we would need the host network namespace to be the trust boundary for the egress policy to prevent the pod from poisoning its own egress policies effectively.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit harder to mess with than the current sidecar approach, but still ultimately ends up being pretty much the same, I would imagine.
For egress policy, you're talking about preventing, to make sure I'm understanding, you're talking about preventing a pod, specifically an application container in a pod, from accessing other things.
Yeah, like not going through, like on outbound traffic from a pod not going through the proxy. So today, for like Envoy, for example, with sidecars, there's like 100 ways to bypass it.
Gotcha. Oh, got it.
Whereas, unless there's a big issue, there's no way to bypass egress network policies, right? And similarly, I mean, we didn't go do like major testing and whatnot, but the architecture of the old approach of Z-tunnel would allow the same.
So by not having all those different ways to bypass it, is that not an improvement?
No, so in the Z-tunnel as is today, we at least plausibly could make it non-bypassable. I wouldn't necessarily say that there's no way to bypass it today because we haven't done extensive testing and analysis or whatever, but there's at least a path to get there. With this approach, I don't think there is a path to get there. So this means we will be closing the door on egress policies in Istio, which would be a completely new functionality, to be clear. I'm not saying we shouldn't do this because of that. I just want to make sure that it's acknowledged and that people understand this. Or that I'm wrong. I understand it.
So John.
Yeah, thank you for bringing this up. Just to make sure everyone understands. Sorry, I'll be quick. Basically, Sidecar doesn't support this today. What you are raising, right, John? The egress policy.
Yeah.
It's not something Sidecar support today. We could potentially add to Ambient, but with this design, we would not be able to add to Ambient.
Yep.
And we also were originally talking about having that be one of the benefits of Ambient was the non-bypassability. So,
right, and we've also talked about adding network policy, for example, as a functionality that's in Z-tunnel. I think this would more or less prevent that from being possible.
I don't agree that it's fully impossible to do because I think there are probably ways that we can add on to this that will be so it would be easier to detect if pods were bypassing this stuff than it would have been possible to do with sidecars. Again, because the sockets, we know what sockets are there, whether there's listeners or not. So I think there's probably things we can do to make this a little better than sidecars in that regard in terms of detecting that a pod is bypassing this. But I agree, it's strictly less strong than host network namespace controls. But if we are in the host network namespace, there is always CNI conflict, period, right? So it's like, you have to pick one. Yeah,
that's what I was about to say, that we don't have it currently working because if it's in the host network namespace, we need different implementations for different CNIs. And I think that opens up a lot more attack space, attack surface than this approach. Basically, I think in the trade-offs, yes, we lose something here, but we also gain something. We gain a guarantee that all the rest of the policies are guaranteed to work a lot better than if we have 5 ways of redirections for 5 different CNIs. In addition, for pods that are not privileged, which is more pods, we can think of mitigations. I outlined some in the document.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing, right? As long as the pod is non-privileged and Z-tunnel is privileged in the pod network namespace, we can actually probably do some hard boundary stuff. It's only when the pod is privileged, right, or equivalently privileged, right, probably having something like CapNet admin, that we couldn't provide that guarantee, John. Which, as Yuval mentioned, is probably the overwhelming majority of pods. There are very, very few pods that should ever have CapNet admin. In fact, Istio was one of the reasons why pods had CapNet admin, right? And we had to do a lot of work to drop privilege after the sidecar startup, and then moved all into CNI. So I think in the typical case, actually, we could provide a hard boundary for egress.
I'm not so convinced. I mean, for example, what if the pod binds to 15,008 first?
Yeah, so John, I wrote the last paragraph. So in theory, what we can do is attach a bind program in eBPF to prevent things that are not Z-tunnel from binding to that port.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. There's a lot of, it's kind of an arms race, right? There's a lot of ways that you can bypass. Once you have the trust boundaries are blurred, I'm skeptical that you can add them back. But if we're also not adding egress policies anyways, then we don't have to, so it's not as big of a concern.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, my general, a more broad question would be that before we commit to doing this publicly and actually do it, that we get some sort of security review by more people. In particular, there's all sorts of new issues that this introduces, like what if an application sent a HBone request to localhost, for example. I'm not saying that's not solvable by any means. Like, it's probably not so hard to solve, but it's a new attack vector that wasn't there before, for example, and things like that. So getting some sort of, not necessarily a formal audit, because I think those tend to not be useful, but the equivalent in a useful way, I think would be really important, especially given that everyone from the company that's proposing this has a target on their back after publicly auditing another competitor. So we're going to get scrutiny. We should make sure it's by people that are going to help us rather than try to hurt us first.
It makes sense.
So John and the kids, you guys represent big companies, right? Would you be able to socialize with the security experts in your organization? Or certainly will socialize. And Sanjeev, you represent a big company too. And I think we have Eric also on the line. So just want to make sure, you guys know what John is kind of saying.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it will be we're less incentivized to do it because I don't think we're going to use this approach at Google. So maybe it's the best I can answer at this point.
Okay, so Sanjeev, sounds like you guys are interested. Justin, sorry, is that you?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, I mean, John, we might be able to incentivize people to take a look at it, because if this can be bypassed and this is something that we're going to push forward in Istio, and that means that we're not going to have egress policies, it does have an impact on the kinds of policies that we'll be able to standardize in Istio and use in service mesh.
Well, right now, Istio has no roadmap for egress policy, right? Like, it's a possibility, but it is not. There's no roadmap for it.
But we're cutting it off, right, as a possibility.
I don't agree that we're cutting it off. I think it's really TBD, right? We don't have support for egress policy at all. We haven't thought about that. The current approach also has problems because egress policy is not compatible with other CNIs also doing that today. So like it's very much an unsolved problem. I think it's premature to say we can't solve it if we do this. I think it's still TBD, given that we don't even have egress policy as a feature.
Okay, but I mean, I still go back to, if we probably then need to do that work, because if we're cutting it off, then that is an issue.
Yeah, if we're cutting it off, but I don't think this cuts it off any more than the other stuff we have right now. It's very much just we haven't talked about whether that's a feature we can support at all. Like, it doesn't work with the current approach either. Like, ultimately, we would have to do things that are not compatible with the current approach to make egress policies work with the current approach too. So like, it's like, let's just design that feature if it's a priority, right?
Right. So I guess that the point there is, this is strictly better than the current approach, right? Because it's an improvement in compatibility, and it doesn't cut off something that wasn't already cut off. So then the question is, right, if we're trying to re-enable the thing that we cut off, is that viable, right? And we'll have to come to that bridge when we want to do egress policies, and maybe that means there's something even more comprehensive, like swapping out the pod network namespace completely, which obviously is a much bigger change in a whole bunch of ways.
Sanjeev, I think you've had your hand up for a while. You want to go ahead?
Yeah, another sort of quick thing on the network policy enforcement thing. So for the case of a pod sending across to another node, in this case, wouldn't this bypass the egress Kubernetes network policy on the source port, on the source pod?
So to be clear about like egress policy and how this affects it, you do lose the port. You do lose the destination port. So if you specifically have network policy that targets the destination port, if you have egress network policy targeting the destination port, that will no longer work.
Well, let me restate what I meant by egress network.
Oh,
I, meant, I did not mean egressing from the cluster. I meant a regular cluster network policy that is enforced on transmit rather than on receive, right? On the
no, I know. I'm saying egress from the pod, not from the cluster.
Right.
So I'm saying that the destination port is indeed lost. That is true. So if you, let's say, as an example, we're making a request to, hello.com on 9080, that would look like the HBone port to whatever was enforcing CNI, or sorry, whatever was enforcing network policy in the host network.
Mm-hmm.
So now we knew about this. This was a deliberate part of our effort. It wasn't deliberate, but we knew about this, and we're personally okay with it, really for two reasons. One, egress network policy fundamentally doesn't really scale because you need to know about the entire world of potential IPs to even really make it relevant. And also, we know for a fact that most people, like from research we've done, that most people don't use specific ports in their egress policy, which has made us more comfortable with this particular change. But that is a realistic, that is a part of what's happening here, and we are aware of it.
I want to clarify a bit about the egress and egress network policies. So the main point of the egress policy is to say that whatever bypass can happen in the pod, network policy takes over and will block it. So you can say, put a policy that all egress from this pod can only go to the issue system namespace or to the tunnel, basically. And you can also say that all internet egress is blocked, so you can force. So that is how you can layer network policy on top to enforce and to close any gap in bypass that was previously discussed. Obviously, we redirect egress to Z-tunnel. Z-tunnel doesn't implement network policy, so it is lost for everything that is properly going to Z-tunnel, and we need to be re-implemented by Z-tunnel itself. But I didn't mean that network policies will still work, just that they can be layered on top properly.
I think there's a potential to do more with egress than you can accomplish with a network policy. There are plenty of egress solutions that operate at layer 7, doing packet inspection, etc. And as far as I'm aware, that would not be possible with standard network policy, which targets layer 3, but would require non-bypassability in order for us to work with any of those use cases.
Yeah, again, we are sort of slightly overloading egress from the cluster with egress from a pod to another pod in the same cluster. But you're right. I mean, especially when going out of the cluster, then there's all kinds of egress gateways, right? But within the cluster, many CNIs have implemented their policies to be enforced at the source pod, even if they potentially could have been enforced at the destination pod.
But that would still work, right? Because all the CNI operation happens in the host network space.
Well, not in the case of OVS-based CNIs, where the policy is actually enforced inside the OVS switch, not even in, which is sort of invisible to the host network.
Sure, but my point was more that what John is describing is ability to bypass the tunnel, right? And the pod having egress traffic that's not going through the Z tunnel, but it'll still be enforced by network policy.
No, but what about pods that do end up using the Z tunnel, but because of defense in depth or because of two different operational teams, right? Let's say there's one operational team setting up network Kubernetes layer, including Kubernetes network policies, and there's a different operational team sort of managing the service mesh. Each operational team expects their policies to be enforced. But if the traffic is going to a Z tunnel, then the network teams policy is getting bypassed.
You mean if there's a policy that traffic shouldn't go to the Z tunnel?
No, it should go, but a specific destination is blocked. That happens to be reachable via that Z tunnel.
So the Z tunnel, when it creates the outbound connection, it will also come out from the pod. So I think the policy should still work.
Will it look to the OVS like it's coming on the same OVS?
From the same pod, yeah. It looks like a sidecar to the network.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so Sanjeev, we expect this work exactly the same as sidecar with Edgebone enabled, right? So only the inbound.
Yeah.
The policy should be impacted the exact same way if you have a tested sidecar with Edgebone enabled.
The one difference, though, I think, I don't know if, because obviously Ambient is encapsulating at some point. So once you're encapsulated, you've lost the original packet. So you have to do any policy enforcement before you do encapsulation.
So what you're losing, well, depends on the policy, right? If you're doing packet inspection, yes. If you're doing, this IP can talk to that IP, the IPs stay the same. So the port changes to the H1 port and it's encrypted.
Okay, yeah, I'll need to think it through. But you guys look like you've done a lot of work, so that's great. But I just need to think it through. Thanks.
Yeah, the effect is the same as if you had a sidecar-based HBone, right? Destination port is lost, but all other attributes of the traffic remain the same, other than the fact that obviously it's encrypted.
Well, the one difference compared to the HBone sidecar is when you're crossing nodes, you are now getting encapsulated. Whereas with a sidecar,
no. With HBone sidecar, the effect is exactly the same.
Even with HBone sidecar, are you tunneling instead of using the original source?
Yes, HBone, it always runs to port 15,001 or whatever it is nowadays.
Okay.
Right, because it's an encapsulated protocol.
Yeah.
Right, but then HBone sidecar also then does not enforce policy on the inner IPs.
Sorry, what do you mean by inner IP?
I mean, if you're encapsulating, you have
yes, the receiving Z tunnel, right, will emit the traffic de-encapsulated into the pod network namespace.
Okay, yeah, sorry, let me not take too much more time. I'll think it through.
Okay. I don't see any other hands. I think it's probably reasonable to move to the next topic because we do have a couple of topics lined up. Does that sounds good? Sanjeev, actually, you are up next. So yeah, can you try to limit to 10 minutes? I know you have a lot of contents too, so.
Yeah, we'll keep it short, and actually most of it might become redundant given what you guys have just presented. But since we had mentioned in a previous call, and I think Louis or somebody had said to share what we've been doing, I'll just very briefly share it, but possibly it becomes moot because of the work that Yuval and team have done. So I'll just give a 5-minute update on that.
Yeah, do you want to share your screen yourself, or you want me to help you try?
Go ahead and share. Sure.
Go ahead, yeah, take the control.
Okay, you guys see what I'm sharing?
Yeah.
Okay, so we were looking at it specifically with the context of making Ambient work with the OpenShift CNIs and specifically OVN Kubernetes. So this is sort of a slightly broader slide deck, but let's just focus on a couple of these slides. So yeah, so as we know, the OVS data path is sort of invisible to the Linux network layer, so you can't really attach any of the IP tables, any BPF rules. And so we had a similar idea, which is, so we looked at 3 possible solutions. S1 was to redirect from inside the container namespace. So that was exactly like what Yuval and team had proposed, that we add some redirection logic inside the namespace of the container itself. Option 2 was to add new flows inside the oven case CNI, sort of like policy-based routing to kind of do some selective redirection within the CNI. And solution S3 was to kind of add extra hops between the pods and the OVS so that you have additional places to attach these upstream eBPF or IP tables rules that similar to what has been already done. So we were sort of looking at the broad space of what are the pros and cons of all these things, and we felt like S1 and S2, the first two are probably the candidate solutions. So we are currently in the process of prototyping both S1 and S2. However, if your solution is available, we would love to play with that, and maybe that does make essentially S1 redundant. We'll have to see, but it sounds like it might. The other point we wanted to understand was this whole thing about zTunnel wanting to see the service IP of the packet. So the current logic is that zTunnel should always get a packet which has not yet been denatted. And we didn't discuss that in just now with in Yuval's discussion, but I assume that in that case, since the zTunnel socket is already getting the packet with the source as prepared by the source, the zTunnel is getting the non-denatted packet. Whereas if we had to do anything else in one of these solutions, we would have to sort of preserve the source IP, the service IP into another part of the SKB, let it go through the CNI, get denatted, but then have the zTunnel the ability to either work with either receiving the service WIP or the denatted WIP, or be able to retrieve the other the service WIP from another portion of the SKB. So that was sort of one portion. Again, I'm keeping it short, so I'll skip over all of this, but if anybody wants to discuss, we can discuss offline. Again, a lot of this could become redundant by what Yuval has just described. So anyway, we were in the process of prototyping this, but the basic idea was similar, that maybe there's some value in redirecting at the inside the container namespace. And then what kinds of redirection could we do? So we looked at two possible kinds of redirection. One is a TC level redirection, and one is a sock map like type redirection. I guess analogous to what Yuval has said, but the only difference is that we were thinking, we were still thinking of it like kind of like two hops, kind of going to the zTunnel and then going to the pod, destination pod. So there were some subtle differences here. So we were in the process of sort of prototyping the TC version of this, and we were hoping to share it over the next couple of weeks, but we can decide whether it's worth continuing with this or not. So we have had some internal discussion with our OVN team, and I think this was another thing that we were looking at. Again, we will need to decide again. And then we were sort of putting together a comparison of these different options and to see. So I'll kind of just stop here. The bottom line is that we were looking at sort of OVS-centric CNIs and the solutions that we were considering. One of those is quite similar to what Yuval and team have just talked about, which is S1. And then we also had S2 and S3. We are in the process of prototyping an S1 and S2. I did want to talk a little bit more about network policy bypass and also the service load balancing DNAT issue, but maybe that after we've properly understood the proposal from Yuval and Solo, maybe some of those questions will get answered. But so we'll try to. So that's really it. If there is any need to continue this, we would. But we'll certainly be looking at close look at the solution that was just presented. And
okay, thank you so much, Sanjeev. And yeah, we'll definitely keep you posted as soon as we open the PR, because I think it's going to save you a lot of effort for sure, because we spend like multiple months to do the work. So yeah.
Yeah, and also I would like us to put some more work into this whole CNI modeling as to what is the sort of distribution of responsibility between the L4 portion of the service mesh and the CNI layer. And I think some of the layering discussions and so on are relevant to that. So maybe we can contribute there as well.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. All right. With that, I don't see any hands for questions. I would like to propose, given the time constraints, let's jump to the next topic. So I will start sharing my screen. All right. So the next topic I want to briefly discuss is, hey guys, we've been stuck with alpha for a very long time. I think it's critical for us as a project to define, what can we get out to claim ambient for beta, even portions of ambient for beta. And also this KubeCon Europe coming up in March. This time KubeCon is a little bit earlier. So the next release of Istio, which is 121, it's going to be critical for us to claim some portions of the ambient to beta. So I want to kind of socialize with the team. In fact, I'll be helping, putting out the boards for ambient, drive ambient to beta soon myself. But I want to socialize with the team with assuming the contribution from Yuval is going to be accepted by the community, Yuval and Ben. Effectively unblock ambient to support any type of CNI. What are the major beta blockers in everybody's mind? So Mitch, I saw you have a hand.
Yeah, Lynn, at the October TOC meeting, we said that we were going to write a document proposing an L4 only beta for ambient, that the TOC was going to put that together. Do you know if that's been started?
That's a great question. Yeah, I'm not aware of it started. We did had a long discussion, follow that TOC meeting in TOC steering questions. Mitch, I think you are, it's a public channel. I think you are there too. So a couple of you, I believe Keith was one of them. I think Keith might just dropped off, waiting very strongly of Istio is not Istio without any of the layer 7 functionalities. So the key takeaway I took from that thread is many people are not comfortable to deliver Istio just for layer 4 and claim that as a beta, as a service mesh product, which is why, I think we should potentially include some of the layer 7, maybe not every single layer 7, but if we can have layer 7 policy, maybe not for telemetry, I would be really happy. I think that would be way better than just having secure overlay layer.
And do you feel like that's achievable within the next release?
Personally, I think we have a good shot with it. Certainly, John is a big chef here cooking a new API for Waypoint. I think there's a lot of dependency on that. If the API disruption for Waypoint is going to be kept at minimum, I think we have a very good chance for the rest of the layer 7 functionality, which has been out there for a very long time. John, go ahead.
Yeah, I just can't see a realistic way that we propose a novel networking capture mechanism in this month, which is also December, which means nothing will happen. And then in a month from now, we declare that beta. That does not seem in any way realistic.
Why do you say that?
One thing I would say, John, is we did have multiple people test, probably in the terms of hundreds of people testing this. So it's not like this PR we're going to open, it's brand new. It's like 6 months plus work behind it. So
well, it's brand new to everyone. It's not in those group of 100 people, right? Like no one here on this call has seen the code. Actually, that's not true. I have seen it, but I didn't look at it. Good look at it. Like we don't. It's so new. It's it's this huge new thing. It's complicated. It's novel. It's great. I think it's lovely. But I don't want to get people's hopes up so that suddenly this unblocks beta, which also had a long list of requirements that aren't solved by this proposal, if I remember the document correctly. So it seems odd. Like we're saying that it's going to be beta quality by mid-January, when probably then we have maybe 1 week, and then we'll be out, and then we have 2 weeks of stabilizing. Like it just seems very unrealistic to have that be beta by then.
If I can add a comment to this thread, I think the key here is what API surface we are supporting and what model we are supporting. So the way I read John's document, if we are still talking about the document I'm thinking about, is that we would leverage the gateway model, and if the users are using a particular maybe API model and post naming and everything, and is restricted to that, then it is as stable as Istio, because it's not based on anything ambient specific. It's just regular Istio support for gateways and pretty standard stuff. It's nothing special. And I think Louis' document is kind of perhaps going to the same direction, if I'm reading it or interpreting it correctly. So if we set the right expectations, that, I mean, not necessarily that it will be fully compatible and will use all Istio APIs or a large surface of Istio APIs, but it's L7 using the standard gateway API, and more standard based than what we have today, then I don't think it's unrealistic to say that that it will be beta or stable, because it would rely on stable features.
Yeah, Jeremy, I think you had your hand for a while. Then we'll get to John.
Yeah, I just have a question about like how this scope was derived and how it relates to the current drive ambient mesh to beta doc. I noticed that in the original doc, there is priority levels P0, P1, and P2. And P0 is the must-have for ambient beta MVP, which is what it sounds like this scope reduction is trying to target, an MVP for beta, right? Does this scope encapsulate all that is P0 in that original doc, or does this supersede the original doc and present a new narrowed scope, I guess? And are we going to document that in the doc?
Yeah, that's a great question, by the way. The discussion right now is to gauge people's feeling at a high level. And we do have a to-do to go back to that doc to refine, what's the absolute minimum to have ambient to beta, because we can't have that doc sit for another year and not shipping anything as a project. So we're just trying to figure out what's the best way to make progress while gauge everybody's perspective.
That makes sense. Thanks for clarifying, Lynn.
Yeah, thanks for that question. John?
I don't remember raising my hand, sorry. I have too many
Oh,
minutes.
no worry. I guess it doesn't automatically lower for you. That's probably why. So does anyone see any other hurdle? I think, John, you raised the concern of the CNI integration code is a little bit too new, which is the flag for you. Does anyone have any other major concern or major blocker?
For beta, to be clear, that if you look through the beta doc, there's all sorts of P0s that are completely unrelated to this effort that are not resolved and have no one working on them. So
maybe
we need. To be clear, I think this is great. I really want to do this. I want to see it go forward. I'm not saying it's never going to be stable. I just don't think it's going to be stable within a month of today. And I don't think that it being stable means that suddenly all of ambient is beta.
So, Joe, just for clarity, I don't think, and Lynn, you can tell me if I'm wrong, I don't think that what Lynn is saying is that we have to bring the whole project to beta right now. I think more of we, and I assume everyone else here, are very interested in ambient becoming more widely used and driving it forward in some way. And I think the sentiment is just that right now it feels like that path still feels blocked. So maybe the to do here is that we need to go, like, because you said there's a bunch of P0s on there, so maybe those aren't P0s anymore, right? So maybe the task here is to figure out which of those are still P0s, and if CNI testing is a P0, then we don't, right? Then maybe that is a blocker. But I think that right now we all have a different concept of that, like Costin brought up sandwich. So you know what I mean? I think we all have a different concept of what all these things mean. So yeah, I think
sure. And
yeah.
until we are on the same page on what beta means and what it doesn't mean, then having this statement like we'll be beta this release, I think is like, I don't want to be the bad guy here, but it's just setting us up for a disappointment, right?
Yeah, so what I want is to set up a beta working group to define what's in the beta, and I want to set up a meeting to figure that out in the next few days. Because the one thing as part of the work is we want to put out the board to have everybody in the community to help us contribute, right? We have people in this call. We also have a lot of people not able to join this call because of time zone. So I want to see if we can define what's the minimum for beta that people feel comfortable and have people driving towards that goal. Was right now people ping me about, they don't know where to contribute. So that's the problem we can help to solve, right? Having just focus for the team as a goal.
Like I'm currently looking at the doc that says drive ambient to beta, and it's a list of things we need to do to get to beta that was reviewed by everyone on the TOC. So what's different? What are we? I'm confused what we're doing.
I guess the confusing is, can we trim it a little bit further to do something before KubeCon, right? Also, we would miss the KubeCon vehicle and have to wait until like the November timeline.
Yeah, I think we need to. It sounds like needs to be a further discussion, but I'm a little bit worried if we're saying that we're going to be driven by the date and then we're also not willing to cut things. And so I understand the feeling of, well, Istio is sort of not Istio without L7, but it also doesn't make sense for us to just meet an arbitrary date and then end up with an API that either we're going to change or is just not correct.
Understood. Maybe at the end is we can't do layer 7. We just go layer 4 for beta for now, right? That's part of the discussion we need to have as a team. I just want to make sure we have something in the goal to figure out what we can achieve within the February-March timeframe for our next release. Was not able to do anything with ambient again.
Right. No, I think we're agreeing. I think we just need to have that conversation, but we also need to have some flexibility.
Yep.
Sorry.
Can someone explain what does L7 we don't have means? I mean, it's what kind of L7 do we want, need, have?
I think it's just API coverage, Justin, primarily. Right.
Which API? I mean, the gateway API itself, it's covered by gateways. I mean, if you have sandwich. All the Istio APIs, I mean, that's a different story. I mean, I don't think all APIs, I mean, even if the APIs are not.
Right, I think the big one there is authorization policy. Right, and we could say authorization policy is not, or for L7 is not beta qual. Right, that's an option. It would be slightly painful, but that might be the necessary evil to make a beta announcement, right, for L4.
We have authorization policy. We just don't have like the right status and reasoning, which Ian is working on that. Is that what you're referring to, Louis?
Well, I think there are open questions about, we don't have all of authorization policy. We have most of it.
Exactly. So we can have a subset of the authorizations that can be marked as stable.
Yes.
And then the rest is expanded. It doesn't have to be all black and white.
Like that's the level of detail we need to get to. In addition to the CNI thing, we also need to know and stabilize the sandwich stuff if we're gonna make that, if we're gonna have L7 or even in alpha state, right? We have to decide and ship, right? I think we want to do that, but we're still to kind of dot some I's and cross some T's on the sandwich stuff as well. Those are the big ones. John, does that sound about right? Like those are the major moving parts still. Like APIs or other things, right? Or layering contracts or stuff like that, right? Istio being compatible with itself.
Louis, John had a comment on that thread. I mean, does anyone disagree that Ambient and Istio must support the V1 gateway API surface and some vendor extensions that are common? I assume nobody disagree with that. I mean, there are discussions about no,
and like I think like we can declare as part of the gateway API support that exists in Istio is pretty comprehensive, and I don't see I'm not aware of any reason why that could not be part of the beta, as far as I know. So there's not a problem really with the Gamma stuff. The bigger problems are probably, well, organization policy, right? The workload attached policies, and the stability of two major infrastructural parts, which have really nothing to do with the APIs, but the CNI and the sandwich, right? And our ability to test those and make sure that they work in the places to work. John's not here anymore, but I think he's dropped. But that sounded like his objection, right?
He's still here.
Oh, he's still here. I asked him. He didn't say anything when I asked him a question. But yeah, so that's like the TOC should go off and talk about this, I guess, is what should happen next.
Yeah, so how about this? I'm going to set up meeting every day till we think this out. If anybody else are interested, just ping me. I'll try to include you as well. Then let's think this out and present to the Ambient work group meeting next Wednesday as a target.
Yeah, and let's get the PR for the CNI stuff out so people can test it with their own stuff, right? If there's a compatibility issue, like that's obviously critical.
Yes. Yep, that's in parallel on top of that. Yeah, because that's different people working on that. Yuan and Ben, yes. All right, Justin, I got you. Yeah, thanks. With that, should we wrap it up? Sorry, there's like 2 more agenda on the topic. Are those beta blocking? Yeah.
I don't think either of them is really beta blocking. But I will just say, if you have interest in using zTunnel as like on a VM, if you could take a look at that PR and comment, that would probably be great. And then the other ones we can just defer.
All right, thank you so much for that. Okay, thanks everybody for joining. Sorry, running a little bit over. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.